In the story of humankind, the early chapters are written not with paper and ink, but with stone, telling of past lives and ancient glories. Here the past endures, in Thebes along the Nile, on the Acropolis in Athens, at Tikal in the rainforests of Guatemala, and among the temples of Angkor Wat in Cambodia. Here history comes alive. 4 sites of unique splendor, separated by oceans, but sharing one common quality. All are places where humankind has triumphed over time. The Sahara, largest desert on Earth. Most of it is uninhabitable, most of it completely barren. But on its eastern edge, the desert gives way to a world of unimaginable fertility, sustained by the yearly flooding of the Nile River. This was the Egyptian land of the pharaohs, a civilization as complex, mysterious, and magnificent as any the world has seen. The steady flow of the Nile brought prosperity to Egypt. Beginning over 5,000 years ago, these lands saw 31 dynasties of pharaohs, a record of stability unmatched by any other people. Today there are no pharaohs, but life has not changed greatly since that distant time. Even today, Egypt exhibits its ancient heritage, a rhythm of life from a culture long past. And nothing has asserted a pull upon the world's imagination the way the culture of ancient Egypt has. Regal, death-obsessed, given to erecting massive monuments to its kings, queens, and gods. Most famous of these are the pyramids of the Old Kingdom, vast sepulchres designed to deter grave robbers and preserve the pharaoh's riches for the afterworld. As monuments, they are superb, but as safe and secure tombs, the pyramids were utter failures. Later pharaohs were forced to search for other means to ensure immortality. 1,000 years after the construction of the pyramids, a new kingdom emerged, and the pharaohs tried again. Their palaces, temples, and tombs were built farther south along the Nile, at the ancient city of Thebes, home to the great god Ammon-Re, and both spiritual and political center of the new kingdom. The landscape around Thebes hosted a building boom of monuments on a scale unequaled since the Old Kingdom. Karnak, Luxor, the Ramesseum, and the Valley of the Kings. This was the age of empire, when the wealth and power of the pharaohs reached far beyond the Nile Valley. Rulers from kingdoms as far away as China sent tributes to the great kings of Egypt. Their names still echo from distant history. Hatshepsut, the only woman in history who crowned herself pharaoh. In statuary, she had herself portrayed with the pharaoh's ceremonial beard. She built her tomb not in the Valley of the Queens, where other women of the royal line were interred, but alongside the pharaohs in the Valley of the Kings. Hatshepsut's final resting place dwarfed all but the pyramids in size and grandeur. Who knows what riches her tomb would have held had it not been pillaged over the years by determined thieves. Hatshepsut reigned for more than 20 years before her stepson and rival, Thutmosis III, usurped her throne. In a determined campaign of historical obliteration, he had all images of his stepmother destroyed, literally chiseled from her monuments. A century later, the pharaoh Akhenaten attempted a religious revolution, replacing Egypt's time-honored pantheon of gods with a single, all-powerful deity. His queen was the stunning Nefertiti, said to be the most beautiful woman who ever lived. They were deposed by powerful priests who placed a 9-year-old boy on the throne, Tutankhamun, whose tomb yielded golden treasures that astonished the world, shedding new light on the abundant riches of ancient Egypt. But of all these powerful pharaohs, one best survived the erosion of time. 40 years after Tutankhamun's death, Ramses II assumed the throne. Born in 1304 BC, he became the greatest king of the greatest age of Egypt. Sharp-featured and imperious, his light hair dyed red with henna, Ramses stood out. He ruled for 67 years, not just as Ramses II, but as Ramses al-Akbar, Ramses the Great. If for nothing else, history will remember Ramses as the pharaoh who cast Moses and the Israelites out of Egypt. But he was many other things in his long lifetime: historian, warrior, peacemaker, and father. By the time he ascended to the throne at the age of 25, Ramses already had 5 sons and 2 daughters. All told, he fathered over 150 children by 8 wives and numerous concubines. But beyond all his other roles, Ramses was a builder. No other pharaoh more splendidly celebrated in stone the abundance of his kingdom. No other built so many temples or erected so many colossal statues. And no other king spent so much time restoring the already ancient glories of Egypt. Ramses was a young man when he began to restore the temple of Luxor, the ancient birthplace of the sun god Amun-Re. He transformed the temple, creating new halls, shrines, and courts. His royal architects perfected lyrical, fanciful columns for the new project, shaped like papyrus and lotus stalks. Ramses dedicated statues to himself and to his favorite queen, Nefertari, who is sometimes shown standing obligingly at his knee. He built an avenue of sphinxes 2 miles long, connecting Luxor with the god's palace city, Karnak. Every year in a sacred procession up the Nile, priests carried statues of the gods between Luxor and Karnak, the stone images celebrated by thousands with offerings and prayers. The Temple of Karnak was Ramses' greatest restoration project. The site was already 600 years old when he came to power, and big enough to swallow 10 Notre Dames. It was a virtual city of temples, a vast labyrinth of shrines, sacred chambers, and religious sites. Archaeological teams like Francois Larcher's are excavating the ruins, painstakingly rebuilding the structures as they once stood. Today, less than 1/4 of the city remains standing. It has taken Francois' team 7 years to piece together how this site once looked. It will take years more to reconstruct. "20 dynasties of pharaohs left their mark at Karnak, paying homage to the gods on the temple walls. Everywhere they erected magnificent obelisks, tipped with gold to reflect the sun's holy rays. Ramses was no different. He too left his mark at Karnak. One of the ancient world's architectural masterpieces, the hypostyle hall is still the largest column chamber anywhere. Ramses completed this building project begun by his father Seti I, carving legends of the gods on every column. But Ramses devoted as much time to glorifying himself as he did the gods. He commissioned huge murals boasting of his victory at Kadesh in Asia Minor, where he single-handedly held off an attack from Egypt's enemy, the Hittites, or so he claimed. It was a story Ramses would tell in stone over and over again throughout his reign, each version more elaborate and more heroic than the last. In a sense, he was the world's first great self-promoter. The final outcome of Ramses' war was not a victory, but a negotiated peace, concluded by Ramses' marriage to the Hittite king's eldest daughter. Etched in stone on Karnak's walls in 1259 BC, it was the world's first international peace treaty. But Ramses was as concerned with eternity as he was with his empire. He prepared for his time in the afterlife by building a temple on the west bank of the Nile. He called it the Ramesseum. It was designed to be the dwelling place where the king would live forever, the house of millions of years, Ramses called it, filled with exquisite carved and painted reliefs. A giant statue once stood guard here. Toppled long ago by an earthquake, it was the largest ever created from a single block of stone. Yet Ramses' greatest building project was not at Thebes at all, but far to the south, at Abu Simbel, in the Egyptian land of Nubia. Here, along the Nile's bank, two temples are cut into the steep rock, glorifying Ramses and his queen Nefertari. In a grand gesture to himself, Ramses had four colossal statues, each nearly 70 feet high, sculpted from the solid rock of the mountain. They faced the sun god Amun-Re, so that each day the god, born again in the east, would illuminate the pharaoh with his powerful light. Inside the temple, 8 statues of Ramses, depicted as the god Osiris, stand vigilant and serene, guarding the inner sanctum that only the holiest of priests could enter. Next to his own massive shrine, Ramses built a smaller one for his favorite queen, Nefertari. As a testament to his esteem for her, he rendered their statues in equal size, a first in Egyptian history. Ramses ordered that Nefertari also be deified and consecrated as the goddess Hathor, light to the sun god Amun-Re. Like all pharaohs of the New Kingdom, Ramses chose his burial place in the Valley of the Kings, a baked and lifeless canyon on the west bank of the Nile. Here the sun died every night, and here Ramses would begin his life after death. 25 of Egypt's pharaohs were buried in the Valley of the Kings, hidden under the rock and sand in an attempt to thwart the relentless efforts of tomb robbers, Egyptian and European. Sadly, none but Tutankhamun escaped the pillaging, not even Ramses. Despite all his precautions, his tomb was looted, his mummified body unwrapped from its jewel-encrusted shroud. Ramses the Great lay alone in death, abandoned, stripped of all ornament and rank. For an Egyptian pharaoh obsessed with the afterlife, it was a cruel fate. Centuries later, a high priest rescued the mummy, placed garlands of lotus flowers and water lilies around its neck, and buried it in a plain wooden coffin in the tomb of Ramses' father. Yet despite the desecration of his earthly body, Ramses the Great did achieve something of the immortality he craved. The temples at Abu Simbel, built more than 3,000 years ago, represented a miracle of human labor and spirit. In the 1960s, a second miracle occurred here. As the waters of the Nile began to rise behind the newly built Aswan Dam, an international effort to save the great temples of Ramses took shape. engineers from around the world joined in the reclamation project, cutting the temples into more than 1,000 blocks and reassembling them 213 feet on higher ground. It was a monumental effort, an effort worthy of Ramses. The temples of Egypt are more than mute stones and obscure hieroglyphics. They represent a way to connect to an ancient people, to a civilization that lasted as long as any other on the face of the earth. Today, Ramses lives on at Luxor, at Karnak, in his innumerable monuments. Straight-backed, proud, steady as the sun, with a gaze that tells us he knew greatness lay before him. In the rainforest of northern Guatemala, the dense jungle defies the encroachment of man, even today. But beneath the forest canopy lurk secrets of an ancient culture that achieved greatness at terrible human cost. This was the civilization of the Maya, and they thrived here for more than 1,000 years. At a time when Europe was still trapped in the Dark Ages, the Mayan people developed a society marked by grand achievements in mathematics, astronomy, agriculture, and architecture. But at the heart of Mayan culture lies a mystery. Their sophistication, their high level of knowledge and learning, was matched with a tradition of human sacrifice and ritual torture. Such is the paradox of the Maya. How could a people so advanced be wedded to the gruesome and primitive practice of blood sacrifice? The answer lies deep in the rainforest at lost Mayan cities like Tikal. At the start of the 8th century, the Mayan civilization extended through all of Mesoamerica, settled with more cities than in ancient Egypt. Centers like Copan, Chichen Itza, and Palenque. Each city ruled a different region, developing its own style of art and architecture. But of all their cities, none approached the sheer size and grandeur of Tikal, a ceremonial center of great importance, yet at the same time, a thriving city of 50,000 people. A great plaza marked its center, flanked by 2 pyramid-shaped temples and a sprawling acropolis of buildings, the sanctum of Tikal's kings and priests. The Mayans understood the science of acoustics, for they designed their main plaza in such a way that a ruler could address a crowd from the top of a pyramid without raising his voice. Here the king and his priests will conduct ceremonies celebrating the completion of celestial cycles. They would make offerings to the god Chark to ensure the coming of rain. In 682 AD, Tikal's greatest ruler, Kakao, ascended to the throne and ordered the construction of these 2 temples, a grand architectural statement that announced the revival of the city after a century of stagnation. When the grand temple was completed, the king's architect left his signature, a palm print above the doorway. Without benefit of metal tools, wheels, or draft animals, the Mayans built on an enormous scale. And yet, despite its great size, Mayan architecture is graced with balance and symmetry. Their temples were aligned with the path of the sun and moon during the seasonal equinoxes and solstices. The homes of Kakao's royal family, his priests, architects, and retainers, looked out onto spacious gardens and courtyards, carved out of the encroaching jungle, a jungle that they respected and honored as the wellspring of their existence. They turned their quarries into reservoirs, ensuring a steady supply of water during the dry season. And they cultivated from the forest over 175 edible and medicinal plants. The Maya used the riches of the rainforest to signify wealth and status. The feathers of the macaw, peacock, and quetzal bird adorned the royal headdresses, along with jaguar skins, which only royalty were allowed to wear. But perhaps the most astonishing of all was the Mayans' profound understanding of astronomy. Astronomer priests tracked the movement of the planets and stars to predict the coming of rain and to calculate the 20 and 52-year intervals that mark the time of great ceremonies to their gods. The Mayans employed 3 separate calendars, one corresponding to the 9-month cycle of fertility, the other to the annual journey of the Earth around the Sun, and the third to an interlocking of the first 2 and time to the 52-year path of Venus. They charted the stars to create the long count, a 5,000-year period that tracked time far into the future. In pursuit of this knowledge, they discovered the concept of zero, a supremely important mathematical idea that eluded even the Greeks and the Romans. The Mayan calendars are said to be as accurate as any yet developed, including our own. For the Mayans, the night sky also symbolized the underworld, Xibalba, a place through which souls must journey after death. The ruler, Acacao, was depicted in a canoe headed to the underworld, ferried by the terrible lords of Xibalba. This scene of the king's passage to death was carved on the leg bone of a prized royal captive and buried in the king's tomb. In the Mayan myth of creation, twin brothers traveled to Xibalba down the trembling canyon and across the river of blood, accepting a challenge from the lords of darkness of a ball game played to the death. The brothers emerged victorious, thereby giving hope to mankind. The Mayans would reenact this myth over and over at important ceremonies, a ritual of life and death played out as victory and defeat. Players would pass through a special doorway before the game began to symbolize the passage from life to death. Every important Mayan city built at least one ball court to reenact this important event, for the game symbolized mankind's struggle for existence. The ball game was so important to the Mayans that players were selected at a young age, housed in separate quarters, and trained for years, often to play just one ceremonial game. For the losing players paid with their lives. Bloodletting and sacrifice were the price Mayans paid to ensure their well-being. They would cut their flesh with obsidian blades or pass a barbed rope through a cut in their tongue. By letting blood, kings would summon forth their ancestors to receive their blessing. They would bring captives home from war to be sacrificed to their gods. Mayans would never resort to wars of mass slaughter, which they considered barbaric. Their wars were ritualistic, meant only for the capture of a few unfortunate victims, destined for ceremonial sacrifice. Royal captives were most highly desired, for only royal blood could truly appease their gods. With Acacao on the throne, the gods continued to look favorably upon Tikal. The city grew, and more temples rose out of the jungle. Merchants extended their trade routes even further, traveling by canoe over floodplains and canals, for shells from Tulum on the Mexican coast and jade from Copan in nearby Honduras. Traders shared their culture, and the Mayan Empire became unified in language. But the land had found its limit. Overpopulation and drought put too much of a burden on the jungle. And the Mayans, who saw its riches as infinite, lost faith when it failed them. The gods were angry. Their priests were powerless, the king no longer almighty. Tikal could not sustain them. The building boom that made Tikal the greatest of Mayan cities was over. The city was abandoned by the year 900. The temples and palaces that once rose above the jungle now sank back into it, absorbed by the same forces of nature that once gave them life. It wasn't until the mid-19th century that Tikal was found again. In 1847, a Spanish tree cutter climbed above the jungle canopy and saw the top of a temple jutting above the growth. "I found a lost city in the jungle," he reported. "You found Tikal," the local Indians told him. And though Tikal may have been lost to the jungle, the Mayan people were not. Despite the cruelty of the Spanish conquistadors and the social turmoil of modern Guatemala, the Mayans are still here, speaking the ancient language, keeping the traditions and culture of their ancestors alive. And just as the astronomer priests predicted, the heavens still circle Tikal, revealing stories told in a code of celestial light, stories half remembered, half imagined, about the end and beginning of time, and of a proud people long ago. On a hilltop above the Aegean, two powerful gods held a contest to see which would become the patron of a great people. Poseidon, god of nature, the sea, of storms and of earthquakes, struck his trident into the rock and offered a priceless gift: the waters of the sea. Athena was goddess of wisdom, intelligence, agriculture, the arts. She had no thunder and lightning at her command. She merely brought forth a small tree, the olive, bearer of oil and fruit. So useful was this simple gift that the people chose Athena over Poseidon, civilization over the forces of nature. They named their city Athens in her honor and invoked her wisdom to guide them through the ages. The white light of the Mediterranean and the rugged Greek countryside fostered a fiercely independent people. They formed themselves into city-states, each a small country unto itself. The greatest of these was Athens. 5 centuries before the birth of Christ, it reigned as a wealthy and worldly political power, the commercial leader of the Eastern Mediterranean. Her traders reached out to the ancient civilizations of Egypt and Mesopotamia, absorbing influences, shaping Greek thought. And in the 5th century BC, Athens witnessed a glorious flowering of human thought and culture. The greatest historians, dramatists, philosophers were all Athenians. But the boldest new idea to come out of Athens was a simple one: that a people, the demos, could be trusted to govern themselves. They called it democracy. This was the golden age of Greece, and it found perfect expression in a massive temple complex built upon Athens' most sacred site, the Acropolis. Constructed to celebrate the gods, it would endure as a monument to the glory of man. In 480 BC, the site was in ruins, destroyed during a war with the Persians. 20 years later, Pericles, Athens' leader, persuaded the populace to rebuild. He hired the greatest architects of the time, enlisted master stonecutters, built cranes and hoists to create a Parthenon and other temples and statues, grander than had ever been attempted before. The gateway to the Acropolis was called the Propylaea, a great public entrance hall that demonstrated the economic power of the new Athenian democracy. The ordinary citizen was perhaps most proud and amazed by its size and splendor, since Athens had never seen such extravagance devoted to secular use. The general of a rival city-state once said that the will of the Athenians would never be broken unless his city stole the Propylaea and set it before its own fortress walls. Beside the Propylaea, a temple to another of the many incarnations of Athena, Athena Nike, goddess of victory. The temple, with its breathtaking view to the sea, served as a lookout post, protecting the city from invasion. A statue of the goddess stood before the temple, holding a pomegranate in one hand, the symbol of valor at war. On the northern edge of the Acropolis stands the Erechtheion, with its odd, asymmetrical shape and beautiful mysterious caryatids, supporting pillars in the shape of women. Of these 6 figures, 3 gracefully bend their left legs and the other 3 their right, creating in this building a lightness and balance unlike any other in the ancient world. A huge bronze statue of Athena stood at the center of the Acropolis, her glinting gold helmet visible to homecoming sailors approaching from the south. Finally, crowning the city on the hill, one of the greatest architectural masterpieces of the Western world, the Parthenon. The Parthenon perfectly communicates the ideal of reason held so dear by the people of Athens. In proportion, it is ruled by the golden mean, the perfect ratio of 9:4, which dictates the dimensions of its front and sides. Extraordinary and ingenious stratagems, tilting the columns a single degree, making the porch rise slightly in the middle, trick the eye into an illusion of perfection. 92 marble panels border the temple, representing the Trojan War and other struggles, both divine and mortal. Directly behind the columns, a frieze circled the building, depicting the procession to the Acropolis that took place once every 4 years to honor the goddess Athena. But some historians suggest that the frieze, in fact, commemorates a darker episode. An ancient king who offered his own daughters for sacrifice to save Athens from destruction. The pediments atop the front and back entrances depicted the birth of Athena and the famous contest between Athena and Poseidon. Although only fragments remain, these sculptures are considered among the finest pieces of art the ancient world ever produced. A 38-foot statue of Athena Parthenos, Virgin Athena, occupied an interior chamber accessible only to priests and initiates. It was covered with ivory and 1,000 kilos of gold. Just as it was over 2,000 years ago, the Agora is still the place where Athenians meet, shop, and argue about events of the day. Then, as now, it was Athens' spiritual and social heart. Political assemblies took place here. For the first time, all citizens were paid to hold public office, so that poorer citizens could participate without losing a day's earnings. It was the world's first true democracy. Freedom to speak openly drew politicians, playwrights, and thinkers to Athens from all over Greece. Philosophical discourse flourished. "You do not know what freedom is," said the historian Herodotus to a foreigner. "If you did, you would fight for it with your bare hands." In ancient times, Greece's first great philosopher, Socrates, strolled the agora, prodding his fellow citizens with simple questions in search of truth. Socrates' uncompromising attitudes made him less than popular with politicians. But Athens was a democracy, and at first he was allowed to speak and teach freely. Dramatists were free to practice their art as well. Modern drama was born in Athens. The rituals celebrating Dionysus, god of wine and pleasure, had evolved into comedy, satire and tragedy, the classic forms we know today. Interpreting history and myth, probing the mysteries of the human condition, these performances became so popular that the Athenians built an amphitheatre on a hillside below the Acropolis and named it the Theatre of Dionysus. Clever political parodies, bloody epics, raucous comedies, and ribald satires were performed before crowds of up to 17,000 people. Drama was immensely popular. In fact, the state thought it so important to the life of the citizens that they were paid to attend. Women could not take part in the dramas, but they were allowed to watch, albeit in the last rows. Despite the Athenians' belief in themselves as masters of their fate, they equally allowed themselves to be ruled by their gods. Their gods were not remote, like those of the ancient Egyptians. They were as real to them as their neighbors, capable of feuds, jealousies, folly and anger. Their gods were simply immortalized versions of themselves. The religious center of the Greek world was a place called Delphi, 200 miles to the north of Athens, the point at which Zeus's eagles, sent from opposite ends of the earth, met. There, a shrine to Zeus's son, Apollo, became the place where the gods delivered judgment. At Delphi, Apollo, the god of prophecy, spoke through an oracle, a priestess in a deep trance, cryptic phrases interpreted for the faithful by priests with the ambiguity of all good fortune-tellers. Supplicants would come from all corners of the Mediterranean to give offerings to Apollo and ask the oracle for answers to their most pressing questions. A fortune in gold was offered to Apollo, housed in separate treasuries, lining the sacred way to the shrine. King Croesus of neighboring Lydia sent 200 pounds of gold and then asked the oracle if he should go to war against the Persians. The oracle answered, "March against the Persians and a great empire will be destroyed." Croesus marched and an empire was indeed destroyed, his own. By the mid-4th century BC, after a few short generations of its glorious experiment with democracy, Athens once again fell under the rule of tyrants. Accused of corrupting youth with radical thoughts, Socrates was given a choice: to recant his views or die. He chose death by poison. After the brilliance of playwrights like Sophocles, Aeschylus, and Euripides, Greek drama went into decline. The Parthenon too suffered the indignity of decay. It was transformed by successive occupying empires, becoming a Christian church, then a Muslim mosque. The Erechtheion at one time served as the harem for an Ottoman military governor. Over the centuries, war took its toll. During a siege of Athens by the city-state of Venice in 1697, a single shell landed among munitions stored in the Parthenon. The resulting explosion tore off the roof and gutted the interior. Despite the ravages of nature and man, A valiant effort is being made to keep the structure intact for future generations. The great monuments of ancient Greece suffer not so much from the ruinous effects of time as the depredations of man. Looters and antiquity collectors took many of the priceless objects until the Parthenon and other temples became shells of what they once were. It is testimony to the power of these monuments that even much diminished, they still have the power to enthrall. Perhaps it is not the buildings themselves, but what they represent: democracy and freedom, the penetrating truths of classical philosophy, the birthplace of drama, an aesthetic standard of beauty and proportion. Their legacy forms an unshakable foundation upon which a great deal of Western thought and civilization is based. The buildings may decay, but like the gods themselves, the ideals they represent are immortal. At first, they appear to be mere blocks of stone. Then faces emerge. And suddenly, there are dozens, hundreds, smiling inwardly, timeless, at peace. Who was this man? God? King? Buddha? His secret, and those who built this place, had lain hidden in the Cambodian jungle for 4 centuries. This mystery in stone exists in a place called Angkor, the great temple city of an empire long forgotten. That city still survives, embracing the people who live here today. In the last millennium, the fertile lands between India and China were fought over for centuries by rival kingdoms in what are now called Vietnam, Laos, Thailand and Cambodia. But in the year 802 AD, a new king ascended to the throne in Cambodia, establishing a dynasty that would last more than 600 years. His people were called the Khmer, as Cambodians still call themselves today. Angkor would become a city of more than 1 million people, larger than any European city at that time, the largest religious site in the world. And its great temples would be among the most exquisite achievements of religious art by any civilization. For the Khmer people believed that they were building, quite literally, heaven on earth. The Khmers already worshipped the great Hindu gods of India. But by the 9th century, the Khmer kings decided to make themselves gods as well, gods on earth. And so each king built himself a temple that would be an earthly gateway to heaven. The finest of these is Angkor Wat. Built in the 12th century, Angkor is actually a map in stone of the mythological Hindu cosmos. The 5 towers are Mount Meru, dwelling place of the gods. Surrounding the towers are corridors running a half-mile around, the wall of rock at the end of the earth. And finally, a great moat that represents the ocean at the edge of the universe. Unlike almost any other temple in the Khmer kingdom, Angkor Wat faces the setting sun in the west, indicating that the king meant this to be his final resting place. The stories of the Hindu book of myths, the Ramayana, are laced with tales of daily life from past ages. People still respond to these stories as if they happened just the other day. Full of folk wisdom and earthy humor, the Ramayana stories link these people to their rich past, preserving it for their generation and the ones to come. At Angkor, these same Hindu myths were carved on the corridor walls. Epic battles between gods and creation stories, like the churning of the Milky Sea, in which demons and gods joined forces to create the elixir of immortality. They are attended by hundreds of delicately carved apsaras, seductive nymphs who inhabit the heavens. Apsaras grace nearly every corridor and doorway on each level of Angkor Wat, in homage to their enduring art of courtly dance. These court dances dramatize many stories, like that of Sita, the beautiful wife of Rama, and their adventures in and beyond the royal court, always with good triumphant over the evil demons and other dark forces. The court of King Suryavarman, Angkor Wat's builder, was grand indeed. Processions were common. He even had a platform built at the east gate so that he could mount directly onto his elephant, no staircase needed. Looking out at the commanding views from the central tower, nearly 20 stories high, Suryavarman must have felt his kingdom was invincible. But only 25 years after his death, the city was sacked. In a surprise attack, a nation to the southeast, the Chams, razed Angkor while the new king, Jayavarman VII, was out of the country. Already in his 50s, Jayavarman was said to be a serious and devout man, stocky and plain of face. Unlike his Hindu predecessors, he had embraced the peaceful doctrines of Buddhism. The sacking of Angkor roused him. He returned not only to crush the Cham invaders, but to become the greatest Khmer builder of all time. When peace was restored, Jayavarman ordered an enormous new city to be built. Angkor Thom would be impregnable to attack. 54 stone warriors guard the south gate, 27 smiling gods and 27 scowling demons, dressed as the arch-enemy Chams. Looming above, a 20-foot tower with a king's smiling face stands watch. That image is Jayavarman's mysterious legacy at Angkor, for in the heart of the city he built an extraordinary temple called the Bayon. Here 54 stone towers loom out of the terraces, each carved with 4 enigmatic faces, 216 in all. Is it the face of Jayavarman, as some believe, for the likeness is strong, or is it Buddha himself? In his 80s, he could look back on an unparalleled legacy of building, not only of temples, but of roads, travellers' inns, hospitals. Angkor teemed with life, reflected on the walls of the temples, a marvellous panorama of a past age. Hunters after birds, families preparing to barbecue, a woman giving birth. The rhythm of life follows the rhythm of the land, much as it did hundreds of years ago. At Angkor, the ancient Khmer kings built vast waterworks to trap the lakes in the monsoon season. Soon, the land was producing 3 and even 4 rice crops a year, creating a prosperous leisure class and an increasingly extravagant lifestyle at court. One of Jayavarman's temples alone required 18 high priests, 2,740 lower priests, and some 66,000 people to perform the services of the temple. Jayavarman built terraces ringed with great stone elephants, where members of the court played polo against the commoners. Angkor's splendor became renowned throughout Asia. In the year 1296, some 70 years after Jayavarman's death, a Chinese envoy named Chow Tao Quan observed the Khmer court. He wrote of waiting women in flowered robes, carriages drawn by horses ornamented in gold, and magnificent court spectacles of music and dance. Like this telling of the story of Hanuman, the monkey god, and his effort to rescue the beautiful cedar from the demon's palace. But while the fame of the Khmer court spread across Asia, Cambodians were gradually embracing the teachings of Buddha, which taught that the end of suffering comes from the individual and not from powerful gods and their royal counterparts on the throne of Angkor. Eventually, the lavish temples became merely the folly of princes, their extravagant upkeep straining the treasury. New rulers neglected Angkor's costly reservoirs and canals. Crops failed. Mosquitoes breeding in the stagnant pools spread malaria. The empire was vulnerable. And in 1432, it was crushed for the last time. Invading armies from Siam destroyed the great city of Angkor, dragging booty and slaves back to their capital. They left the great temples to be devoured by the jungle. 4 centuries later, French archaeologists deliberately left one of the ruins just as they found it, a vivid reminder of the threat of Angkor's deterioration. The temple of Ta Prohm, built by Jayavarman as a tribute to his mother, is now half consumed by tree roots, strong enough to split the stones. In the nearby town of Siem Reap, Cambodian preservationists restore Buddha figures, rescuing them from the encroaching jungle and the predations of terrorists and vandals that have plagued Cambodia in this war-torn century. Their work here is not merely craft. It is an act of faith. During the 1970s, the Khmer Rouge tried to eradicate traditional art and culture by a reign of terror. But the Khmer people have succeeded in reviving their ancient arts, handed down by masters, even to the youngest generation, who are keeping their traditions alive. In the smallest gesture, these people, like the great kings of Angkor, are consecrating their own corner of heaven, ensuring that the eyes of Buddha will be ever watchful over this place. Humankind has always strived for permanence, for something that transcends the narrow boundaries of their lives. These splendors are a symbol for the stubborn insistence of the soul. They are among the few places on earth where we can hear the ancients calling out to us, and our own voices answering back. For it is not only stone that survives in these ancient sites, but the human spirit as well. The love of ancient cultures unites the past and present, enriching both and preserving the full breadth of human experience for all time.